I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, yeah. Way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave, yeah, before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Hey, hey. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Yes! It's me! Yes, thank you, it's me. Keep clapping. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Clap for the St. Patrick's Day miracle. Yes. How would we know that you wanted the St. Patrick's Day miracle if you didn't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. Thank you for taking a break from your St. Patrick's Day festivities to spend an hour with me talking about libertarianism. Because, let's face it, what could be more fun than... Hey, thanks so much for joining us. This, of course, is a Muddied Waters media production. Check us out on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Anchor, Twitter, Periscope, iTunes, Float, Google Play, everywhere, all of Twitch, all of the different podcasting applications, anywhere on the internet. Check us out wherever you are watching or listening this. Be sure to either like us or follow us or subscribe to us or whatever the thing is called to show approval and following on whatever platform you're using to watch or listen to this right now. If it's on YouTube, then don't just press subscribe, but also hit the bell, because I want your phone to literally explode with updates every time we go live or post a new video or really do anything. I want to have total control of your phone whenever I want. So be sure to do that. Be sure to share this video this very second, or this audio, or whatever you are watching or listening to. Share it right now. The last thing that I want is for your closest loved ones to miss out on a roughly hour-long libertarian podcast on a Wednesday evening. Be sure to give the gift of Spike Cohen today. Kids love it. This episode, of course, is brought to you by the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus, the fastest growing waffle-related caucus in this or any other political party. Become a member today by going to the official website, which is or the official Facebook page for the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus, which is appropriately named the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus. And if you want to become an actual duly seated and accredited member, whatever that means, go to the Muddied Waters store at muddywatersmedia.com/store and get your button today. This episode, of course, is also brought to you by the Gravy King. And this episode is brought to you by Nug of Knowledge. Smokable CBD products. Nug of Knowledge is not your everyday CBD supplier. A portion of the profits go to help end the harmful war on drugs. They also have a compassionate use program that donates medicinal hemp products to veterans and people with disabilities who cannot afford their natural remedies. And many people who use it say that it helps with joint pain, stress relief, or even a much-needed pick-me-up. Be sure to use the checkout code SPIKE when you go to nugofknowledge.com. Use that checkout code SPIKE for 10% off today. This episode, of course, is also brought to you by Joe Solosky, running for governor of Pennsylvania. Joe Solosky is the key to Pennsylvania's success. If you want to help him in his run as the Libertarian Party candidate for governor, go to Joe Solosky, JoeSoloski. Did I do that right? Yeah. .com to find out how you can help him today. We also have a new sponsor who I told you I would try it out, but I forgot to. I haven't tried it out yet, but our newest sponsor, appropriately named, is Mudwater. I mean, that would make sense because we are Muddied Waters Media. That makes sense. But Mudwater, which is a coffee alternative. If you were saying to yourself this morning when you were drinking your coffee, you said, honey, or maybe you call yourself honey. Maybe you don't have to have a significant other to scream out honey. Honey, I would like to have something that isn't coffee, but does have mushrooms in it. Well, we have some fantastic news for you, friend. Mudwater is the mushroom-based coffee alternative. Not those kinds of mushrooms, just normal mushrooms. It has masala chai in it. It has cacao, not just cocoa, but cacao. It has mushrooms. Again, you're not going to hallucinate. It's good for you. They're neuroprotective, but you're not going to hallucinate. It has turmeric, sea salt, cinnamon, and that's it. That is it. So if you want to try that out, I can't wait to do it. I just keep forgetting. But I will let you know if it's good or not. But if you want to try it out, if you don't even want to wait to find out if this is actually a product that tastes good or not, then be sure to go over to muddywatersmedia.com/mud and order your starter kit today. And finally, of course, this episode is brought to you by, where'd that thing go? Personal injury attorney Chris Reynolds, attorney at law. If you are in Florida and you find yourself personally injured, well, I have some fantastic news for you. I'm so sorry. Also, you can contact Chris Reynolds and he might be able to get you money. I can't promise that. I'm not going to promise that because then you could sue me and I don't want to get added to your lawsuit, but you might very potentially. It's not unfeasible that Chris Reynolds will be able to get you the money that you need. If you go to chrisreynoldslaw.com, he can help you today. The intro and outro music to this and every episode of My Fellow Americans comes from the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That is Jodavi. Check him out on Facebook. Go to his SoundCloud. Go to jodavimusic.bandcamp.com. Go to his Bandcamp. Buy his entire discography. It's like $25. You will love it. Thank you so much, Joe Davi. I'd like to thank Le Bleu for this delicious, purified, ultra pure, ozone, oxygenated, BPA-free, non-carbonated, kosher water that is apparently made in America as well. Bulavanaka. Man, that must have been parched. That is actually delicious. Shout out to Tehran Turks' mom and him as always. Folks, I've got a really cool guest tonight. We talk a lot about corporate media versus independent media, but I actually have an independent journalist today. My guest tonight is a journalist and editor and also the founder of BamaNewsNow.com. BamaNewsNow.com, B-A-M-A newsnow.com, which is one of the largest independent news outlets based in the state of Alabama. And we are going to be talking about the differences between independent journalism and our crony corporate media that we often have to listen to, the lamestream media. So, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, without any further ado, please welcome to the show my guest, Mr. David Preston. David, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Thank you, Spike, for having me. But you missed a platform that they can tune into us on too. That's if they've had the coronavirus vaccine, they can just tell Bill Gates to play us in their ear.
Yes. How could I forget the microchip network? The Bill Gates. Find us on Bill Gates Microchip Network and follow us by twitching both of your ears like this. No, thank you so much for coming on. This is going to be a really exciting conversation. And folks, be sure to comment with your thoughts and questions, and David and I will tell you if you are right or wrong. Now, David, before we get started on all of this, I'm just curious, what got you into, what made you say, I want to be an independent journalist? I want to be a journalist and create my own news, or not create my news, but cover the news in my own way. Was that kind of an aha moment, or sort of a gradual evolution over time? Tell us about the David Preston Genesis story.
A little bit of both, actually. I've always wanted to be a conservative radio talk show host. Ever since I was little and listened to Rush Limbaugh, like everybody that's in conservative talk radio nowadays is inspired by Rush Limbaugh. But it really started a couple of years ago when I participated in a gun discussion group that was led by Spaceship Media and Advanced Media, which, if you're not familiar with who Advanced Media is, they're they own NJ.com, AL.com, Oregon Live. They own several websites and newspapers around the country. But that happened the same in Washington, D.C. at the museum. The same weekend they were holding the March for Our Lives rally. So they brought about 20 of us from around the country, different backgrounds, different political views. And that really inspired me to start writing columns, which were obviously tied to the gun discussion. But that kind of I got my bug. I teamed up with a guy out of Huntsville who owns a website called BamaPolitics.com. I started writing regular columns for him, but his vision for his website was different than what I wanted to see it go in. I wanted it to become more of a general news as well as opinion columns and sports, covering anything and everything regarding to Alabama. So I kind of went out on my own and started BamaNewsNow, and that's what we're working towards doing now.
Cool. Very, very cool. So, we talk a lot on all the Muddy Waters programs. We're not really journalists as much as more kind of opinion people, but we do sometimes break news to the people that follow us. That right now what we're going through in the media world is sort of this disruption that's happening where there's many disruptions. The first one is, the old model that we've had for as long as we've had media, which is that you get your media from a small handful of corporate media outlets, is ending. Even with the advent of social media becoming more and more corporate, there's still many more sources that you can get things from. And within those social media outlets, there are many other, smaller outlets that aren't directly affiliated with Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or whatever else. And so it's greatly opened up the ability. We right now are producing a program from my computer that is better in quality and distribution than something that even the most high-level media outlets could have produced even 10, 15 years ago. And this is now something that basically anyone can do. So there's been this massive decentralization, democratization, whatever you want to call it, of the ability to do media. At the same time, you are seeing that corporate media become more and more centralized into a small handful of corporations and their attempts to use social media through their connections in government and just general their influence in pop culture to try to demean that independent media and write them off as a bunch of kooks, and it's just a very interesting dynamic. What is your take on on that struggle between independent and corporate media, and how it plays out in how we are receiving information and news and so forth?
Well, both have a role to play in the media. Corporate media is not going anywhere anytime soon. It's very profitable. I mean, if you look at the profit numbers for Fox News, I mean, basically it's the only property that the Murdochs refused to sell to Disney when they sold basically in the entire Fox Corporation a couple of years ago to Disney, because it makes so much money. But and the same with CBS, ABC, NBC, all of those properties. But what's exciting is not only are people do you have those different independent sources of media, and you have that even at the state level, like here in Alabama. You used to 10 years ago, even 10 years ago, you got your news from AL.com, you got your news from iHeartMedia, or you got your news from one of the TV corporate owned TV stations, and that was it. But now we have AL.com, we have Yellowhammer News, we have BamaNewsNow, Bama Politics. So you're getting many more voices out on the table. And what's so exciting is people are actually searching out and looking for those different independent news voices and those different sources because because they don't trust the corporate media anymore, because the corporate media is saying, well, what you believe is wrong, or what you believe is stupid, or what you believe is a lie. You've been told a lie, so you need to just listen to us and listen to what we only going to base in facts and truth. When in the old model, way back when William F. Buckley was around, the role of the media was to tell you the story, give you all the facts as they can give them to you, and then let you make up your mind as to what the truth is. They don't let you do that anymore in media.
Yep.
They tell you what they think the truth is, and if you don't believe them, then you're a liar, you're a kook, or you just need to be canceled because you're destructive to America. And that kind of mentality that we have that's in corporate media today is really what is destroying the corporate media from the inside. Because I had a friend who's a retired journalist tell me that, when referring to the Washington Post, actually, that the Washington Post is arrogant but good. And that was a very good description, not only just for the Washington Post, but for corporate media in general. They are arrogant but good. They're good journalists. They're great journalists that work in corporate America. I'm not taking anything away from them.
Right.
But the organizations themselves are arrogant, and they think that if you don't trust them and only them, or you don't believe their truth, then you are wrong and you are destructive to America. And that's just wrong. That's, if you treat your customers that way in business, you're not going to have customers very much longer.
Well, and that's the thing, right? This is what's happening, is that it's not even that necessarily, although there are definitely times that there are journalists that are hacks, and it's not even worth naming names. It does happen. But generally speaking, it's not necessarily that the journalists are bad, or that the journalism they're doing is necessarily bad. It's that it is becoming increasingly editorial, as you said. And the editorial is essentially, if you don't agree with us on this, you're a bad person. You are stupid, you're gullible, you'll listen to anyone, and frankly, you shouldn't be taken seriously. And I mean, if you look at what's going on with COVID, I was saying, and I'm no genius, okay, but when I got sick in February after attending the New Hampshire primaries, where I interacted with many, 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 many people, okay, I leave that, and shortly after, a few days later, I get extremely sick, and I rarely get sick. And I go to the doctor and I go, is this that coronavirus thing? Because I was around a lot of people. I know supposedly there are only a few people here who have it. It turns out that was a lie. But I said, is it possible I have it? And the doctor said, yeah, you might have it, but there's no way of knowing. We're not allowed to test for it yet, which was shocking to me. And she said, so we're going to give you the flu virus, or the flu vaccine, or the flu test. They gave me the flu test, came back negative. She said, okay, let's assume you have COVID or some other similar viral infection. Stay home for at least 2 or 3 weeks until you feel better. So I voluntarily quarantined myself for the rest of February and even a good bit of March, because I just didn't want to inadvertently be spreading it. They were talking about it could last for 27 days back then. We really didn't know a lot. But at that time, while I was voluntarily quarantining, I was literally in this room making these videos. I was also making anti-lockdown videos saying lockdowns aren't a good idea, mask mandates aren't a good idea. And the narrative then from corporate media was, you idiot, that's never going to happen here. 2 or 3 weeks later, the corporate narrative was, you idiot, if you go outside, or if you don't do what they say and do these lockdowns, then you're killing everyone's grandparents. And we now know, we have the benefit of an entire year knowing that the data is showing that the lockdowns didn't work, that even the mask mandates didn't work, that there wasn't any real appreciable difference between similar states and cities and communities that had these mandates and lockdowns and that didn't. And yet the entire time, and even now, corporate media, not just the government and the politicians, we expect that from them, but corporate media continues to tell us that we are, harming other people if we are, for example, going outside to see our going outside to St. Patrick's events, or going outside to sports events, or going inside to see our families for Thanksgiving or Christmas, or doing any of these other things. Now, of course, when there were massive Biden celebrations after Biden won, that was okay. That was a celebration of democracy. But then after that, then it was bad again. Is there a point where they will sense that maybe they can also get things wrong and should maybe be a little bit more humble? Or is it really going to take us just leaving them and going on to media that, at least treats us like maybe we know what we're talking about and we aren't a bunch of rubes and idiots?
They're never going to learn. And the reason the perfect example I can give of why they are never going to learn and become more humble and be self-critical, which is what they really need to do to become better as an organization, not just journalists, but as an organization, is the recent news out of Washington Post was just exposed for basically making up quotes on a Trump phone call to election officials in Georgia. Stuff that was never said. They basically that they put in quotes, and it was presented as these are direct quotes. And 2 or 3 months later, obviously after Biden's in office and it doesn't really matter anymore, they came back and they didn't even come back. It had to be exposed by different media organizations. And then Washington Post said, well, our source basically paraphrased and summarized what was in the phone call, and we inadvertently put it in quotes. No, you presented that information as a direct quote. You did it. You got it wrong. You got the quotes wrong. You should have presented it as a paraphrasing or summarization, not as a direct quote. And instead of apologizing, you're just trying to deflect and obfuscate your responsibility in this matter, and that's just wrong.
And like Zach Britt says in the comments, it was on tape. This was something that was recorded, and we know that there were other things that were on there, where he had made some kind of veiled threats and things like that. But there were actually parts of it that were, like you said, they were quoted. But the whole recording is there for you to listen to, and it actually wasn't there. It's a very interesting thing that and like you said, then when they get caught, they go, well, you're all a bunch of fools, and it's a very interesting dynamic. Let's talk about how media is covering, for example, the first 50 days of Joe Biden, of the Biden, or 50 plus, what are we up to, 60, 55 days, something like that. Something like that. Joe Biden, well, let's first of all say, when we say corporate media, there is a left corporate media and a right corporate media, kind of a center-right and center-left corporate media. The center-left is obviously much larger and than the center-right, just as a result of them kind of being the media for the longest period of time, and then, this more disruptive Fox media. But in terms of viewership and things like that, it's actually pretty even. But so let's look at the first 50 days of the Biden administration, the major differences between the Biden and Trump administration from what I've seen in terms of actual policy, not rhetoric, but policy. The major differences I've seen are that you now have to wear a mask when you are on federal property and on airplanes, unless you're Joe Biden or John Kerry. And then also transgender people are able to serve in the military again. There is no, in terms of everything else, we are still seeing massive deficit spending with no end in sight. We are still seeing escalations of wars overseas. We are still seeing families and children being put in cages. I'm sorry, overflow migrant detention facilities. They're not cages anymore now, they're facilities. But we're seeing children and families being put in cages. We are seeing what was essentially the logical conclusion to COVID with both the warming of the weather, us approaching something resembling herd immunity, and the vaccines, which was something that was going to happen if Trump was in office, Biden was in office. That's not a big difference. So there isn't really a huge difference. And yet, would you say that there's been a difference in how corporate media has been covering the last 50 plus days or 2 months or whatever compared to, I don't know, the last 4 years in office?
Oh, absolutely. Just the tone and tenor of the way that the journalists are covering the different administrations. Like, I believe one of the first questions from the current press secretary, Jen Psaki, when she became press secretary after the inauguration, was something about animals or something. That is a question that would have never been asked of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, because they were too busy trying to do gotcha questions to her or about Trump or for Trump, right, or whatever. And you're right. First of all, on the all these stooges in the liberal corporate media, they owe me gas money, because I don't know if you've noticed the price of gas lately, but it's almost gone up here in Alabama $1 per gallon over what it was when Trump left office. Now,
Right.
yes, all of that's not Joe Biden's responsibility,
Right.
because
Right.
oil is a worldwide commodity, but he does have a lot to do with it. And but again, like I was going back to the corporate media, and like you said, it's on both sides. Fox News has certainly become more combative and more in your face about their coverage of the
Right.
Biden
Right. Right.
and and the other outlets have become a lot more friendlier to the with their coverage of the Biden administration than they were with the Trump administration.
Right.
And I'm like, it's your job as a journalist not to be friends with any of these people and not to ask them softball questions, but to ask them hard-hitting questions and demand that they answer your question. If they don't answer it right then and there in the press conference, then you can continue to follow up with them. You continue to ask for the information that you've asked for, and you press them until you get the answer. That's what a journalist's job used to be. It's not that anymore. And until corporate media realizes that that's the type of journalism that so many Americans is looking for and is missing from TV news, cable news, even local, what's left of local newspapers and websites, they're going to continue to lose viewership and they're going to continue to lose readership, and it's going to continue to harm the corporate media industry, because that's one of the reasons why I started seeking out independent sources of media, because and reading as much as I can, because it's that because I'm looking for that in-depth coverage of a subject. Like, for example, CNN. I used to have the CNN news app on my phone when Trump was inaugurated. There was one subject related to the inauguration. I can't remember what it was, but CNN had 5 different articles listed at the top of their app, all about the same subject, when one in-depth article from maybe one or two of the journalists would have done, and they could have gone a deep dive into it, but they didn't do it. And that's why corporate media is being labeled as biased and fake news, because when they do something like 5 articles on the same topic, it makes the reader or the viewer feel like they're bombarding and they're going after that subject matter, which just happened to be Trump.
Yep. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Two things, and they are fake news. Even if what they're saying is true, at times the way that they present it is in the most phony way possible. You will see how the same headline is used over and over again for a series of stories when it's obvious that these corporations are pushing a specific narrative, often that is very cynically made just to benefit them and make them profit. It's absolutely incredible. I think 2 things, and you mentioned one of them was energy. 2 things that have shown a real sharp shift in how things are being covered. I want to say personally, I think that gas prices right now are largely a result of the fact that the economy is opening back up, that, there's this sense that we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with COVID. The big major move in energy that the 2 big major moves in energy that Biden has made, the canceling of the Keystone pipeline, which was kind of dead in the water and hadn't been completed, and his moves to not allow any new or continuations of fracking licenses on federal lands. Those are things that will definitely affect energy prices in the future. I don't know, outside of some speculation, how much that's going to affect prices right now. I think it has more to do with just the natural ramping up of the economy that's going to happen once people feel like the pandemic we're on the tail end of the pandemic. But we see how it's being covered differently. If Donald Trump was in office and this was happening, the left side of corporate media, which is the bulk of corporate media, would be finding a way to blame Trump, and the right-wing media would be saying, well, no, this is a natural occurrence. Whereas now it's flipped around. The media is either ignoring the majority of media is either ignoring it or explaining it, and the right-wing media is saying, no, Joe Biden has driven up energy costs. Another one is the fact that Joe Biden still hasn't had a press conference where he's actually taken questions from anyone. And the few times he has taken questions from journalists, he'll come over and say, yes, we're in discussions with people or something like that, and then immediately walk away. And we know that when Trump didn't give give regular press conferences, the few times that he didn't do that, that left side of corporate media was saying, "Where's Trump? Trump is hiding. Trump's hiding from us. Why haven't we heard from Trump?" And yet Biden, as I understand it, has actually broken a record for the 100-year record for the longest time that a sitting president has gone since he's been inaugurated, that he has not spoken with journalists. So I guess my question.
Hard at work. I was just going to say, but he's hard at work trying to solve the problem of the pandemic. He doesn't have time to do a press conference, according to the corporate left stream media, because he's hard at work. But
Very hard. Very hard.
Would you really want to have a press conference with a president that looks like Lemony Snicket from the series of unfortunate events?
I mean, no, I didn't vote for him. I voted for myself. So
well, I voted for you too. So.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. Thank you. I wasn't gonna. I always feel weird asking people, "Did you vote for me?" But hey, thank you. I appreciate that. I
voted Libertarian the last two election cycles, mainly because I got disillusioned with the Republicans, but also I just really did not like Trump. I mean, his personality. Trump and I agree on a lot of things, a lot of policy. But and for me, it was just the way he talked about the female members of his family just rubbed me the wrong way. And because I live in Alabama, and Trump both broke.
He was going to win Alabama,
Reagan's records in Alabama. I knew I could vote for the Libertarian Party, and he would still win the state. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna give my vote to the Libertarian Party. Hopefully, enough people do that we can get them better ballot access, which as well as I do. Was not successful the last couple of times.
No, but I appreciate your support, and we're building on it as much as we can. In the comments, Sarah Morales says that we are in a series of unfortunate events, so it would be appropriate that we've elected Biden. But it's a very interesting thing to see that shift and even when they're talking about the kids in cages, that was the big one, right? Like for a good part of 2018 and 2017, it was the kids in the cages. We got to do something about the kids in these cages. Trump is putting kids in cages. And one of the few things that Trump said that I actually cheered on when he said it, I was live streaming it on Muddy Waters when he was doing it in the debate. He said to Joe Biden, "Who built the cages, Joe?" And he was right. Barack Obama, who I still call him the deporter in chief because he still has the single term record for most number of immigrants deported and detained. And it wasn't even Donald Trump didn't even come close to the number of it was something like 4 or 5 times more that were deported by Obama than by Trump in their respective single terms or first terms. It's wild to see that shift where it's like, it's not a problem anymore. Or, at least the person doing it isn't saying mean things and tweeting mean things about migrants anymore. It's like, yeah, I'm sure that's a real consolation to them while they're being shoved in cages in record numbers. Like it's absolutely amazing. So you're of the opinion that this is not something that they're going to self-correct. There's so much hubris there that they're just going to continue to lose market share as they continue to insult larger and larger portions of their intended target audience.
They will continue down this path until they get to the point where they're corporate overlords, and that's what I'm gonna call them, is corporate overlords. They're basically their corporate boardrooms. Look at the bottom line and realize that their bottom line is shrinking because their news divisions are losing more and more money because advertisers don't want to advertise on those productions because nobody's watching them. That is the only way that they are ever going to get close to the point of self-correcting because, money talks, everything else walks.
Right. And it's funny. And they're seeing a major reduction in ratings because Trump's not around anymore. And they can't even talk about his tweets because he's not on Twitter. So all they can do is mention his occasional, press release that he puts out. And I've seen a dynamic, especially of people on the left who I've heard it so many times and seen it so many times on social media. And I'm sure those of you watching at home, and David, you probably have as well, people going, "I'm so glad that I don't have to pay attention to the news anymore. Now that we have a good, decent president in office, I don't have to follow what's happening right now." And it's like, well, first of all, Yeah,
You
you
should
do, and the fact that you really should be the fact that you are just giving total trust to Joe Biden. Maybe you should be paying attention because some bad stuff's happening right now. But also that can't be good for ratings. These are people that were watching CNN and MSNBC to get their daily outrage porn, and now that someone that were told that they can trust is in office, they're like, oh, no, it's fine. I don't need to cover the news. He's got it handled. Everything's going to be okay. So that certainly can't be helping their ratings.
Oh, it absolutely isn't helping their ratings. Barbara Walters, when she was still on The View, said it best when Barack Obama was elected president, that the best thing that ever happened to Rush Limbaugh was Barack Obama getting elected president, because that forced conservatives to start paying attention again, because they had gotten used to 8 years of George Bush in office. They may or may not have liked George Bush, but he was a nice, affable guy, and he wasn't really doing anything that was uber liberal, so they really could tune out and go do whatever they wanted to do. But once Barack Obama became president, they had to start paying attention again. And guess what happened to the ratings of conservative media outlets like Rush Limbaugh, Fox News, and so forth? They went sky high because conservatives start paying attention again. You're starting to see that same phenomenon. Ratings for Fox News, Newsmax, other conservative media outlets are starting to go back up because conservatives are tuning in again, and the ratings for liberal left-wing media outlets are going down, like CNN, because Democrats don't feel like they have to pay much attention because their man's in office, their man's going to take care of them, their man's going to send them a $1,400 stimulus check every month, and everything, life's going to be great in Alexis de Tocqueville's America.
Yeah, Alexis de Tocqueville's America. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. It is an interesting thing that the media who demanded essentially, or the part of media that demanded essentially that Joe Biden be president, is now suffering as a result of it in terms of their profits. But the thing is, media, and this is part of the something we need to cover or talk about. Corporate media is really a loss leader for the larger corporation it's a part of. They're fine with their media outlet losing at least some money as long as the other rest of the corporation is doing fine and good. And we have a corporatist president to match corporatist presidents when it comes with handing massive corporate welfare and bailouts to the big crony corporations, mega corps and multinational, multi-trillion dollar and billion-dollar businesses that they're getting handed trillions of dollars, and you're getting stuck with the bill for. If you look at all these stimulus bills that have happened, there is already been $6.6 trillion spent when you compare the amount of money that's been spent from the stimulus bills, the three stimulus bills, the executive actions that have been taken, and the Federal Reserve actions that have been taken. Something like $6.6 trillion have been spent already. That works out to roughly $20,000 per American citizen, not taxpayer, not household. Every single American in this country would get roughly $20,000. Instead, they've all been stuck with $20,000 bill plus interest, and there's another $4 trillion to be spent, almost $4 trillion to be spent, which will bring the total up to $32,000. The average American has $3,200 to show for that, so roughly a tenth of what they're going to end up being stuck with a bill for, with interest. The interest will end up over the next 40 years being more than the $3,200 that they got out of the whole thing. It's a huge shell game. But anyway, before we go down to that whole rabbit hole, let's talk about something, kind of shift gears a little bit, and talk about we'll still stay on a federal thing. Here's someone who actually is a holdover from the Trump administration, Dr. Anthony Fauci. I think I'm saying that correctly. You wrote a very interesting. Well, I was going to say you wrote a very interesting article recently comparing him to Lucy from Peanuts, and I want you to explain this because it's a really fun article to read, and I will actually put it in the comments while you're talking about it, so people can read it later. But without I don't want to bury your lead here, so go ahead. How is Dr. Fauci like Lucy from Peanuts?
Okay, I got the idea. The idea was inspired by an interview he did with ABC News, left corporate media, in which he said that the reason why he initially said 60 to 70% of Americans need to get the vaccine for herd immunity to take effect is because he felt like less than half of Americans were going to want to get the vaccine. When he saw numbers that upwards of 60 to 65% of Americans were were willing to get the vaccine, he said he felt comfortable upping that number to 75 to 80%. And I'm like, I didn't. I'm not a doctor. I didn't go to medical school, but I did take high school biology and a high school human anatomy. That's not the way herd immunity works.
Right.
Herd immunity doesn't change based off of how many people are willing to get vaccinated or not. Herd immunity is a definite finite number. Now it's different for different viruses. I will grant you that, but it's a definite finite number that you need to reach for basically the herd, quote unquote, the human population, to be immune from that virus. And I was like, and I started thinking, I was like, and then thinking back on how many times has Dr. Fauci been wrong throughout the pandemic, with the first of all, when it first started, he's like, don't wear face masks, they're useless. I'm like, that doesn't make sense either, because anybody that's taken high school biology knows that if it's a coronavirus, which we know there's like 12, 15 coronaviruses out there. We've named like 9 of them. But to be a part of a family, like a coronavirus family, you have to share certain characteristics. Like you have to share certain genes with your extended family to be considered a family member, right? I mean, your cousins, they're not like you, but they're like you because they have similar genes, right?
Right.
But so I was like, and what we know about other coronaviruses is they are highly transmissible through the air, through breathing in. So why aren't they telling us to wear a face mask? And then eventually it changed to you need to wear a face mask. So he's changed his story so many times throughout the pandemic. I was like, this guy is Lucy with the football, and we the American people are Charlie Brown. And I was like, that would make a great column. So I started writing it, and then I remembered while I was writing it, I was like, didn't Lucy also run a medical advice stand where you could get medical advice for 5 cents?
For 5 cents. Yep.
Yeah, I was like, well, if he continues to be wrong and continues to change his story over and over again, as he's continued to do since I've written the column, his advice is going to be worth about 5 cents. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, there's only so many times a boy can cry wolf.
And this is the problem, right? Is that, when you have someone that's constantly shifting the goalpost, or as you put it, constantly throwing the football out and saying, oh no, next time we'll definitely let you go outside again, or tell you that it's safe to go outside again, or in some cases let you go outside again. It eventually reaches a point where people shrug their shoulders and say, I'm going to just go back to living my life. There's that picture of him holding up the thing saying 15 days to slow the spread. That was over a year ago. And the reason that was over a year ago, originally we were told, and this is again Lucy with the football, the purpose of these lockdowns, we're not going to stop the virus. We now have community spread, and we're not going to stop it. But what we can do is avoid the disaster that has happened in other countries where their healthcare systems weren't ready to deal with the influx of all these patients. So what we're going to do is, for a roughly 2-week period, we're going to just kind of have everyone stay home as much as possible to help slow the spread temporarily, so that we can deal with, so that the hospitals and supply chain can deal with the upcoming surge, so that when we open things back up, then people can go and it'll naturally spread, and we can deal with that surge. And we may occasionally, if it surges too high, have to do temporary lockdowns. During that time, they and the World Health Organization, and probably other organizations as well, said that long-term lockdowns don't work, because you can't feasibly make everyone stay in their house for longer than 2 weeks, or even really just exclusively stay in their house for 2 weeks, because everything would fall apart. The farms would lie fallow. The power plants would shut down. The supply chain would fall apart. People would be dying of preventable illnesses and heart attacks and everything else because they can't go anywhere. So you can't make everyone stay home for 2 weeks. So you have to kind of restrict them somewhat, and the longer that goes on, the more likely they are to find a new routine that results in them interacting with just as many people as they would have without the lockdowns. And really all you're doing is causing, devastation to small businesses. You're causing devastation to people who need to get a treatment for addiction, or, preventable illnesses or cancer. You're devastating an entire generation of children who are missing that interaction at school. You are making people more and more lonely because they're not around as many people and they're more shut in. You're feeding people's hypochondria by making them think that walking outside is going to make them sick and die. All these bad things are going to happen. And they said this. They said that it was going to hurt people and that they shouldn't do it. And then they did it. And then they told everyone that if you don't go along with it, you are killing your grandmother. And of course, now we have the benefit of the data showing it was all garbage. But, they told us over and over and over again, they kept moving it. It was 15 days. It was a month. It was, we got to, shut the world down until we end disease. And it was very interesting to see how that got covered.
Oh, exactly. And if you said if you don't do this, you're going to kill your grandmother. Well, Alabama's Governor Meemaw, Kay Ivey, she's kept us in mask, and she's going to keep us in mask till April 5th or April 9th, one or the other. I can't remember.
Yes.
And basically, I think the only reason she did that, and this ties back into corporate media, is so that when we see a spike after spring break is over with, because we're currently in the middle of spring break right now.
Yep.
Alabama's beaches are a big destination for college and high school spring breakers because we're family-friendly beaches. You're not going to come to Alabama's beaches and see a bunch of LGBTQ people prancing around the beach, hugging and kissing each other, and a bunch of lewd conduct, even amongst people that aren't LGBT, because we're family-friendly beaches. Our police make sure that we stay family-friendly beaches. But so we're going to, listen, I drive for a living, so I drive the interstate that goes towards the beaches, and I can tell you that they're overcrowded because they didn't get spring break last year, so they're trying to get it in this year. We're going to see a spike, especially in Alabama and especially in the Southeast, after spring break's over with. And she kept the mask mandate in place through Easter so that AL.com, the leftist corporate media in this state, could not criticize her for ending the mask mandate at the beginning of March. And then we saw a spike that we are going to see because of spring break.
Because mask mandates don't work.
Exactly. Well, they don't work.
They don't work. They don't work.
And even in Alabama, they don't work because they're not enforced. We have a mask mandate, but I mean, if you walk into a store or a restaurant or anything without a mask, they're not going to stop you and tell you, unless they're just really militant about it. They're not going to stop you and tell them to turn around and go back out until you get a mask. They're just going to let you walk in, do what you need to do, and go. Because where there is no enforcement, you can't be arrested for not wearing a mask in the state of Alabama. That's why I predicted in March that she would end the mandate, but she would change the language from mandate to recommendation. But she just said, instead of doing that, she said, I'm extending the mandate, but I'm not going to extend it past the next deadline. After the next deadline, we're over. It's over and done with.
Right. So it's a CYA. It's a CYA. Everyone here knows that this thing doesn't work at this point, but they're still saying it so that the media doesn't go, you with your mask mandate removal, you killed all these people. And it's like, no, that's not how this works. If the mask mandates worked, then California and Washington, D.C. and New York would have much lower rates of spread, and they don't. It hasn't happened. It has not happened.
Andrew Cuomo wouldn't have had to fudge the death numbers in nursing homes because
please. Yeah, and he wouldn't have had to do that. You wouldn't have just seen John Kerry get caught, sitting in a plane without a commercial plane in first class, refusing to not wearing his mask, and then claiming, it fell off. You can see his lap. It didn't fall off. He was just sitting there because not only does he think he's above the law, which he is, but he also recognizes if John Kerry and if Joe Biden, when he went to the Lincoln Memorial hours after signing the federal mask mandate, saying that he would have to wear a mask there, and then he didn't. He went there with his whole family. Or Governor Gavin Newsom at French Laundry. If they not only do they think that they're above the law, but they also are demonstrating that they know that this is all BS. Because if they actually thought that these mandates and lockdowns worked, then they would be doing them voluntarily to save their own lives. John Kerry's not a young man. Joe Biden's not a young man. They know that this is nonsense. I want to go to a couple of comments
on the John
here.
Kerry story, though.
Sure.
The shocking part of that story isn't that he wasn't wearing a mask. The shocking part of the story was he's flying commercial.
Yeah, well, why he's flying commercial, because he gets all the flack for flying on his private jet when he's the climate czar of the country, giving us a hard time because we eat beef or don't all drive hybrids, and here he is driving, flying around in his own private jet. So here's some comments. Elizabeth Coquillard, hey Elizabeth, says we lost a homeless vet to cancer because of Holcomb's executive restriction on hospital procedures. We're holding a vigil in 2 weeks. That is horrifying, and I wish I could say it was the first time I heard it. I've talked to many people who have cancer or who had cancer who have not been allowed up until recently for an entire year to have screenings for cancer because of the off chance that they might catch COVID in a hospital that has explicitly said we are able to protect the non-COVID patients from the COVID patients. These are the same state governments that were shoving, as you mentioned, COVID patients in nursing homes and mental health facilities who were saying we don't have the protocols in place to protect our residents from these COVID patients. And then, of course, they lied to the investigators about all the deaths that happened as a result of it. But now, you can't go and get checked for cancer. You can't go to, it's funny, you couldn't go to an AA meeting because that's non-essential, but you can go to an alcohol store or a store that sells alcohol. I mean, this was game to hurt everyday Americans. Someone else said, Sarah Morales said, a new routine. I had to file Chapter 11 on my bakery. I'm so sorry. I mean, this is what they did to small businesses. The big ones got massive bailouts. You got told that you were, a threat to everyone around you. Justico Mitchell says, how dumb were we to think they meant 15 days? I was for it. Justico, I quarantined voluntarily for roughly a month because we just didn't know. And I missed a couple of libertarian events. And I told them why. I said, listen, I was sick. And we don't know how long it lasts after you're sick. And I don't know that I have COVID. I may have it. And so I'm just going to do things remotely until we know for certain that everything's okay. And after a while, it was obvious that everything was going to be okay. And I resumed doing it. I made a personal choice, which was far better than any kind of lockdown or mandate or anything else. Stanley Jajawi says, I never stopped working because I was essential. All of this is a joke. There were entire industries where people just continued to continue to do things as is.
So I was one of those. My paying job, the job that I'm working until I can start making enough money off of BamaNewsNow to support myself, is I deliver bread. I'm a bread delivery driver, auto parts as well, and lab specimens as well. So it's I worked the entire pandemic, all the way through. Yes, I lost some revenue from some places that had closed, had been forced to close down, but it wasn't. Fortunately, it wasn't a lot. But I worked straight through. I'm just like your commenter there that I worked all the way through, and and because I'm in and out of hospitals all the time with lab specimens and bread, it's why I volunteered before there was even a mask mandate to start wearing my mask on a regular basis, because I'm going in and out of these hospitals. I don't want to bring coronavirus in if I catch it. That's why I'm on Saturday getting my second dose of the Moderna vaccine, because I'm in and out of these hospitals all the time. It makes sense for me, and I made the personal choice to get the vaccine for that very reason. Nobody made me get the vaccine. I just chose to do so because of the fact that I realize I'm going into high risk buildings and high risk situations. So it's better for me to do what I need to do to mitigate my chances of not only catching the coronavirus, but bringing it into those high risk situations.
Exactly. You made a personal choice based on your desire to mitigate risk to yourself and others. And if someone agrees, I'm glad I said your name right, Stanley. I was worried about that. If someone agrees with you, they disagree with you, that's perfectly fine. You made a personal choice. You didn't try to turn around and tell someone else, you have to do this too, and if you don't do it, you're killing my grandma and all that nonsense. You just made a personal choice, like I did. I remember when I was making the videos and there were people saying, why are you saying you're against lockdowns when you're quarantining? And I said, because I'm choosing to do that. I am choosing to do that. And I'm also in a position, I'm retired. I don't have to go work. My life was not substantively changed during that time. My wife went grocery shopping instead of me during that time. A couple times I went to the beach when there was no one else out there. But for the most part, my life wasn't substantively changed. I was in a position to be able to make that choice, and so I did it, and it didn't affect me. You can't impose that choice on people who are non-essential, who are essential to their households to be able to make an income in order to be able to provide for their families. And it's just very sad.
And a quarantine is isolating sick people. A
Yep.
lockdown is
Yes.
controlling the population.
Thank you. Yep.
That's
You're
the
quarantining
difference.
healthy people. Yeah. You're quarantining the vast majority of people who are healthy. And especially once we knew, because again, early on, in some countries, the fatality rate was as high as 8, 9, 10%. That's scary. That's a scary, scary thing. That's something like 30 times as many people dying as what we're seeing right now. That's millions of Americans dead. That's a scary thing. So, in March, I'm like, hey, I'm going to take this thing easy just in case. As the data started coming out into March and April and May, showing that the fatality rate of this thing, it was anywhere from, it was several times more deadly than the flu, but it wasn't the movie Contagion, where 1 out of every 5 or 10 people was going to drop dead of it. And it was largely going to affect people that were older and had comorbidities, or people that were morbidly obese. And that the reason that the fatality rate was so high to begin with was because they were shoving patients into nursing homes with the people that are the most likely to die from it. And as we saw that, and that it wasn't truly airborne, which interestingly enough, when they said it's airborne, so we have to do a lockdown. If it's airborne, the lockdown's not going to do anything. You can catch the cold in your house not going outside, because the cold viruses, or most of the cold viruses, the rhinoviruses and coronaviruses that are the cold virus, they freely float around with just enough of a load for you to catch it through your freaking AC vent. So unless we all had HEPA filters on every register coming into the house and all of our windows were airtight, there's no way to stop a truly airborne virus from spreading. You might as well go outside and go live your life, because you're going to catch it anyway. The so-called science behind this was absolutely absurd. But I mean, we can go ad nauseum into this. I want to shift quite a bit into something else that government does to impose itself on the people who have done nothing wrong, or haven't been accused, or often haven't even been accused of doing anything wrong. We actually talked about this on my last episode with Josh and Justin with For All Tennessee, and that's the subject of civil asset forfeiture. And you've actually been you've been covering this somewhat. Tell us about, this has been a hot button issue in Alabama. Tell us a little bit about what civil asset forfeiture is, and tell us about what's happening in Alabama with that subject.
Okay, civil asset forfeiture, at least here in Alabama, I may not be completely familiar. It may be slightly different in different states, but here in Alabama, if you are suspected of criminal activity, but the police cannot prove that you you participated in that criminal activity, and you profited from that criminal activity, they can do what's called civil asset forfeiture, where they can go to a court and ask the court to basically force you to turn over your property to them, because they think you committed a crime and profited from it. Perfect example of how ludicrous that is. Right here in Mobile, Alabama, where I sit. Before the pandemic started, we were having a controversy with tow trucks, and the record list for whenever you get in a car accident and police respond to the car accident. There's a list of towing companies that they basically go down the list, and they call call you when it's your turn, and you come pick up a vehicle. Well, the ordinance that established that set out the fine and fee structure for that. Well, to make a long story short, there was some back and forth, and there's some legal opinions about what is a consensual tow, which cannot be regulated by state or local ordinance, and what is a non-consensual tow, which can be regulated by the state and local ordinance. And it went back and forth and back and forth. One of the tow companies that really challenged the police on this matter ended up getting charged. The owners ended up getting charged with multiple counts of fraud, because they were overcharging insurance companies and customers from what the ordinance said that they could charge.
Oh, okay.
The tow companies said, well, it's a consensual tow, we can charge whatever fees, and there were some other things. Well, anyway, after the fraud charges, which were dubious at best, because I saw the arrest warrant applications and for the charges, the charges are dubious, so dubious that a district court judge and a circuit court judge said most likely that the prosecution will fail when it goes to trial. Two judges said it will probably fail. That didn't
Right.
stop the police from
Nope.
trying to seize their tow trucks. Both judges said they're probably going to fail. They get their tow trucks. I'm not granting you the civil asset forfeiture, or better yet, it was a temporary injunction forcing them to return the tow trucks to the company so that the tow company could continue to be in business and operate and make money to pay for their
Right.
defense. So, like I said, dubious charges, not been convicted of anything. They haven't even gone to trial yet. They're scheduled to go to trial in June, but the police tried to go after their tow trucks because of that. And there's multiple stories of that throughout the state of Alabama. There's one small town north of here that basically had the lowest police officer to citizen ratio in their city, because they had like something like 15 cops in a town of like 2,000 people.
Okay.
Because the police department was funded by civil asset forfeitures and
Right.
the seizure of people's vehicles that were speeding through their town. So it's always been a problem in this state, and there's been multiple attempts to try to reform it. But a new freshman legislator out of North Alabama, his name is Andrew Sorrell, out of District 3, props Representative Sorrell, actually filed a bill in this legislative session to repeal civil asset forfeiture, and not only repeal it, but prevent police departments in the state of Alabama from circumventing that ban by participating at the federal civil asset forfeiture.
Nice. Okay, good. Because that's a
And,
big part of it. There are many times that they ban civil asset forfeiture, meaning in state, but then they're still allowed to participate in the federal program, making it absurd. They just have the feds seize it and then they get it. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So that bill last week passed out of committee with a favorable recommendation, and is now on the agenda for the full House of Representatives. I doubt it will pass. I'm skeptical because even efforts to reform civil asset forfeiture have failed in the state because it's run into resistance from law enforcement associations,
Police
the
unions,
different the sheriff's organization, the organization of police chiefs, because that's how if they don't fund their departments that way, that's how they bring in extra funding to do stuff like, for example, our sheriff's department here in Mobile County, they buy extra protective equipment like bulletproof vest or ammunition for the firing range to stay proficient, and they fund that through civil asset forfeiture funds. Well, civil asset forfeiture, by definition, is not criminal asset forfeiture, which it would be perfectly okay with me, even as a libertarian, if you're convicted of a crime.
Yeah.
If the police wanted to go after your property that you profited from that crime, I'm all for that because you committed a crime. You were found guilty in a court of law of that crime. But if you are not convicted of a crime, the police shouldn't be able to just willy-nilly take your property and then force you to prove that you didn't commit a crime and pay thousands of dollars, sometimes 3, 4, 5, 10 times the amount of what the property is actually worth. And see, that's where they run into, that's where how they get you is they basically make you prove that you're innocent, and you have to spend money with lawyers fighting in court, fighting lawsuits. And you usually win if you actually challenge it in court. But I mean, you're out the money for your legal fees. You get your property back, but you're out the legal fees because the police know they're not going to have to pay your legal fees. So I've actually been talking to several state legislators here in Alabama that are friends of mine, and I'm like, well, why don't we try this one reform, simple reform that other states are trying with tort reform, which would vastly improve the situation with civil asset forfeiture, and that is automatic loser pays. If a police department or a sheriff's department seizes your property, you challenge that seizure in a court of law and you win, not only do you get your property back, but now if under automatic loser pays, the law enforcement organization has to pay your lawyer fees.
Right.
You know what would happen if you had that? You'd have lawyers that would take many more of these cases on contingency, because they would review the facts. They would know it would be a good case to take because it would most likely win.
And the state would have to pay for their costs as a result of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Plus, it would force law enforcement organizations to set up an administrative process that would be much cheaper for the property owners to go through to get their property back without actually having to go to court and hiring a lawyer, because the sheriff's department or the law enforcement organization knows that if you go to court and they lose, that they have to pay your legal fees, and they don't have the budgets for that.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, obviously, the best way to go about it is just end it. Someone mentioned, I think it was Stanley Jajawi, who said, that some, most crimes on the books right now are unconstitutional victimless crimes. So absent that, let's say we remove the victimless crimes, now you're only being charged for, actual, violent offenses and theft and not just violent, but crimes that have victims: theft, fraud, rape, murder, kidnapping, that so forth. And if they are, after you've been convicted, they're able to demonstrate that you profited X amount from that, and then they seize based on that amount. And you still have a process by which you can still appeal that or whatever, then that makes sense. But to process, because how civil asset forfeiture is used in the two main ways is they go in, they accuse you of something, they seize all of your property so you can't effectively defend yourself. That forces you to plea it down because you don't have the money to defend yourself, and then now you lose everything because you can't effectively then go and go to court and say that you should have your stuff because you basically pled guilty to something else. Or if by some miracle, even without any of your money, you're still able to get found not guilty, you then still have to go to court and pay money to prove that they should give you the stuff back, even though it was just proven in court beyond a reasonable doubt that you shouldn't have had it taken from you in the first place. That's the first way that it's used. The second way it's used is they often just go in, and I see this all the time. I've heard so many stories. The police come in, they accuse you of operating a business without a license, or they accuse you of, some lesser crime, and they seize all your money, and they say, "Have a great day." And the reason they do that is because they know that, you're not going to take them to court over the car that they stole from you, because it'll cost you more than the car, or the few $100 or few $1,000 they stole from you. So they just straight up rob people. It's a protection racket that they use.
Well, it's just like that towing company situation I mentioned.
Yes.
They basically took their way of making a living. They took their trucks from them. And they said the reason why they wanted to seize the trucks is because they were the instruments of the fraud. Well, both of the judges that I mentioned previously basically said, were the trucks the instrument of the fraud, or was the invoice submitted to the insurance company or the car owners the instruments of the fraud?
Right,
right. Like I said, two judges basically told the prosecutors, "You're probably going to lose this case." And they still tried to seize the property, to the point it actually went. The prosecution actually appealed to the Alabama Supreme Court. The Supreme Court reversed the TRO. They didn't say that the civil asset forfeiture was right or valid. They just said that the courts did not have the authority under the law to issue the temporary restraining order. So
that's
the lower
incredible.
courts. So now the police haven't tried to go collect those trucks again after that ruling, thankfully.
Right.
But legally they probably could if they would be in the right if they really wanted to try.
Yeah, the only way to stop this is to end, at least at the state level and really at the federal level, end this program. There's actually studies, at least for the past few years, if you take all of the private sector burglary and compare it to the civil asset forfeiture dwarfs private sector burglary. The government is the biggest, and I mean, obviously taxation is also theft and extortion, but if we talk about just going in and straight up taking people's stuff from them like that, not even including taxation, the federal and state governments are easily the biggest thieves in the country and in their respective states as well. It is a terrible, terrible thing, and we should be absolutely ending it. Here's a comment from Sarah Morales. She says, how much time do you think it takes for them to get a proper warrant to seize it versus how much time it takes to climb hills and prove your innocence? That's disgusting. Can you tell us a little bit about why it's civil? And, because we hear civil asset forfeiture and we think, well, that's not very civil to take something from. Why it's civil as opposed to criminal, why they're going through that route?
Because the burden of proof is lower. on a civil asset forfeiture, it is a much lower burden of proof
Yep.
to get a judge to sign off on a forfeiture than it is for a criminal. Because obviously,
Yep.
if you're doing a criminal asset forfeiture, you have to prove that a crime was committed and that the property in question was either utilized in the crime or was a result of the profit of that crime to be able to
Beyond.
seize that property under criminal asset forfeiture statutes. With civil asset forfeiture, you basically have to say, Your Honor, there's a preponderance of the evidence that
Yep.
this person committed a crime. We can't
Yep.
prove that he actually did, but there's a preponderance of it. You know, his criminal record certainly suggests that he or she is committing a crime. So we think he committed a crime. We would like his property. And what happens is a lot of times, like you just said with the car, they seize property that is less than the value of what it would take to get it back. And
Yep.
vast majority of the common sense everyday Americans going to say, you know what, it's not worth fighting them over that property. I'm just going to let them have it, and I'll just go buy another one.
Yep.
You know,
Exactly.
and,
Exactly.
and
Especially if they're
well,
engaged in a criminal enterprise, they're like, you know what, just take it. I'll just buy another one. I'll just continue doing my criminal enterprise.
Yeah, and real quickly, back to the law that passed out of committee. I'm actually currently trying to work on getting Representative Andrew Sorrell on my Bama News Now podcast, which you can find on most major podcasting platforms. So I'll let you know if I'm actually successful in getting him on and talking about it. When I get that episode uploaded, I'll let you know so you can let your listeners know that it's why he did it, what his motivation was, and hopefully what he thinks will be the chances of success. Because like I said, he's going to go up against some very powerful lobbies in this state with the Sheriff's Association, the Police Chiefs Associations. Because like I said, they profit handsomely from, not personally. I'm not trying to say that they're doing this to make money personally, but their departments, like I said, with the Sheriff's Department, they buy their practice ammunition for the firing range with their civil asset forfeiture money.
Yep, that's why they have the newest cars. It's why they have the newest equipment. It's why they have the newest anything. And we're all sitting here going, do you really need a brand new car every year or two? Like this is the criminal enterprise has become so advanced that you need to have, they're spending big money because they can, and they're essentially robbing it from us. They're taking it. Yes, they're robbing us the old-fashioned way through sales taxes, property taxes, and so forth, and bonds and everything else. But they're also just straight up,
stealing it.
Yeah, they're just like burglaring people. Like it's incredible. And I'm glad that you talked about the burden of proof. There's in a criminal proceeding, they'd have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Whereas in a civil proceeding, it's based on the preponderance of the evidence, as you said. And without getting too much into the weeds of what the differences are, beyond a reasonable doubt means it has to be pretty much certain that they did it. There can't be any real even shadow of a possibility that they didn't do it, or you should be voting not guilty, or that they haven't been proven guilty, right? Preponderance of the evidence is there's a pretty good chance. It's a 51% chance that they were using. It's just a completely different standard, and it's that standard on every aspect of the case, not just whether they did it or not, but whether or not evidence should be submittable. It's just there's so much. It is exponentially easier to have. So O.J. Simpson, he was found not guilty in court of murder, but he was found to be responsible for their deaths being sued. That is the difference between reasonable doubt and preponderance of the evidence, and we see it time and time again. You have the government suing you for your own stuff without you even being convicted of a crime. It's an absolutely disgusting thing. Well, so
here's a good correlation for as an example for your listeners, and it's this: if you're arrested, there's a preponderance of evidence that you're guilty. Doesn't mean if you're arrested, or better yet, here's an even better one: if you get a speeding ticket, the speeding ticket says there's a preponderance of evidence that you were speeding, that you were breaking the law. If you contest that speeding ticket in court of law, and you can bring in your GPS, your dash camera, whatever, to prove that you weren't speeding, well, guess what? You're not guilty. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a preponderance of evidence that the police officer that pulled you over, that gunned you with his radar gun,
to give you that ticket in the first place.
That's the difference between preponderance and beyond a reasonable doubt.
It's the difference between enough for them to arrest you or to detain you, as opposed to actually convict you and sentence you. That's a perfect example. Yeah. And so it's like, if I can arrest you, then I already have enough to rob you too of your ability to be able to defend yourself. It's a disgusting thing. So David, I want to kind of close out on talking about this independent media stuff and give you some last thoughts, but I give you a chance to give your last thoughts. But first, I just want to ask you, what is your vision? So when we see we got a donation and a $5 donation, and also a comment from Joe Makes Drifts, who says, "Why does my small town in Michigan have 2 Humvees?" And that's a perfect example. Like, it probably because of either civil asset forfeiture or the military surplus program, or both, or some combination of those. But talking about media, we sort of touched on this before, but in your mind's eye, if I were to ask you, which I am, where you see media in general being, let's say, 10 years from now compared to now, what do you think the major differences are in how media, generally speaking, whether we're talking about corporate media, social media, independent media, and everything in between, just the general face of media, what do you think the major differences are going to be, let's say, 10 years from now? So 2031, what does that look like?
A vast majority of the American people will get will get either all or a vast majority of their news from independent media. And the reason why I say that is 2 reasons. First of all, corporate media is going downhill. They're losing ratings. They're losing readership, which means they'll lose advertising. But there's, on top of that, not only are they losing readers and viewers because of the way they cover things, they're losing viewers because people are turning off canceling their cable subscriptions. They're not. They're just they're going to online streaming. They're going to YouTube. They're going to Netflix. They're going to all these different streaming platforms now.
Right.
And that's why you see so many content creators like CBS and NBC and ABC trying to get in on the streaming game, because they can move their content to where the customers are going. But also, because you saw what the outrage that happened when social media basically shut down Donald Trump, with banning him from Facebook and Twitter, which are the dominant social media platforms right now. You saw people in droves moving to Parler, or at least also joining Parler as well as the other 2. Well, look at what they did to Parler when that started happening. Basically, Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey called their buddy Jeff Bezos up and said, "Hey, shut him down," and he did. Because they felt threatened. Their duopoly was threatened by Parler, because so many conservatives had gotten fed up with the misinformation, the fact checking, and we can get into fact checking if you want, but on social media, that was either the fact checking was wrong, the misleading was the misleading character, the labeling was misleading, or what they were labeling or fact checking was never intended to actually be an actual news article. Like, for example, I got banned for 24 hours from Facebook on election day. You know why? I got banned from Facebook for 24 hours because I had the audacity to post a sarcastic, joking post that if you are a Republican to today's election day, go out and vote. It has been decreed because of the threat of violence that if you're a Democrat, you go vote on Wednesday.
Right.
I even put in the post, in parentheses, "Dear Facebook, this is obviously sarcasm, not intended for anybody to take seriously."
Right. Yeah.
That post got me banned for 24 hours from Facebook.
Yeah.
Never intended to be taken seriously. It was not intended to be real news. I wasn't breaking news as a journalist. This was on my personal Facebook page. Still got banned for 24 hours because of it.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that, and it's stuff, and multiple people, even if you're not a well-known conservative, multiple people had that happen to them, and they got fed up with it, and they said, "You know what? You don't want me at your party? I'll go form my own party at Parler," and they saw that as a threat, so they had to shut it down.
Yeah, I recently came off of a 3-day ban for posting something that went against community standards. They never told me what it was, and there was no way for me to appeal it, and I don't know what it was, but I'm very sorry. I have no idea what happened. But also, about a month or so ago, a couple months ago, we had John Brennan, the former CIA director, announced that he believes that from what he's heard, the Biden administration is going to be going after, among other people, libertarians as domestic extremists and terrorists. And so I jokingly wrote, well, a silver lining of the Biden administration labeling libertarians as domestic terrorists is that their CIA will start giving us guns and weapons and training and trucks and stuff like that. And it was funny. It was taken as a joke. It got tens of thousands of reactions across social media. 99% of them were people that were laughing and joking. It was all laugh reacts on Facebook. And I got fact checked twice. The first fact check, the people said, this is false. They said it was partially false. It was false because Joe Biden never said that. Even though when they asked me about it, I said this was an obvious joke. I was not saying it, that he was actually doing this. I was joking, but it was only partially false because the CIA does give weapons to terrorists. I like that part. I felt like that was a partial victory for me. And then the second fact check, they actually realized that it was a joke when I told them it was a joke and that I was joking. And so they labeled it satire. And it was like, is this really what we need? Like, we're grown adults here. It's amazing to me. I want to add an aspect to why Parler got routed the way it did. It wasn't just, big tech. We blame big tech a lot. The same way that with this GameStop thing that happens, we blamed Robinhood app. What we didn't know, and we found out later with the Robinhood app, and what we did know with social media is that there's threats from government. Some of them are veiled, some of them are not so veiled. You'll remember that in the period after the Capitol Hill riots on the 6th, Mark Zuckerberg said to media, he said, we're not going to crack down on dissident political content as long as it's not hate speech or whatever. We don't think that that's a problem. Well, then here came all the corporate media hit pieces saying that Mark Zuckerberg's platform was the biggest single platform that was platforming the Capitol Hill insurrectionists and rioters, and that they were basically engaging in treason and so forth. And then here came the threats of congressional hearings, and here came the threats of potentially repealing Section 230, which would basically end social media as we see it.
Which needs to be repealed anyway.
Well, we could talk about that. Section 230 is why social media exists. If you tell social media they have to be held legally responsible for everything that happens on social media, they're not going to let you do anything on social media. Really, what will happen is all social media outfits will end up going to other countries where they're not subject to Section.
Well, here's the thing with social media, and another reason why so many conservatives are fleeing the big guys like Twitter and Facebook is because, yes, they do have a certain set of standards that you agree that you're going to follow when you join their platforms. They're private platforms. They can have those standards if they want. That's fine. The problem is they don't enforce those standards equally amongst all different political points of view, because there's a bunch of liberals and socialists and communists, frankly, that are on social media that are saying vile and hateful things about the Trumps, Melania Trump. Some of the things that were said about Melania Trump were just flat out disgusting, but they were allowed to stay on the social media platform because they conformed to the view that the liberal corporatist liberals liked and abided by and had. So they didn't find them offensive. They didn't remove them. But whenever a conservative says anything that they remotely disagree with, they're going to label it as misleading. They're going to fact check it, or they're just going to outright take it down and say it was a violation of their community standards. And the reason why I think 230 needs to be repealed is because even with independent media people searching it out, the biggest source of traffic for independent media is still social media. And if with that power, they have the ability to shut down any individual independent media outlet out there they want to shut down if they don't want to enforce their rules equally. Repealing 230 would basically allow the courts, somebody to go to the courts and say, they're not enforcing the rules across the board, and because of that, that's an antitrust violation, and they need to be held accountable for that. Basically, what I'm asking for, I'm sure others are asking for more, but what I'm asking for is just apply the rules equally. If you're going to be strict on conservatives, be strict on liberals. If you're not going to be strict on liberals, don't be strict on conservatives, because the social media really is the new town square. It's where everybody can get together and hear different points of view. And if you're going to start silencing different points, a certain point of view, because you don't agree with them or you think they may be hateful, but not do the same thing for this group over here because you don't think they're hateful, well, then that's you're not applying the rules equally. You need to have balance in the enforcement of those rules. Basically, when you can't get Donald Trump an opinion from Donald Trump on Twitter or Facebook, but you can get child pornography on Twitter or Facebook, you have a problem.
Yeah, and I agree that there need. Oh, I lost you. I agree that there needs to be more even enforcement, especially on the big tech platforms. I will push back on the Section 230 thing though, because it wouldn't just open up antitrust, which is arguable. It could be open even now. It also opens up that if, for example, someone posts something that's illegal, Facebook would be held every bit as responsible as the person posting that. If someone posts something that's defamatory and they get sued for it, Facebook would be held every bit as much responsible for that. What that would eventually lead to is, if they were to remain here in the U.S., that would lead to them so heavily censoring everything that's put on social media that you couldn't effectively use it. It would effectively stifle free speech on the internet and social media, not just social media, but all platforms. What it would really do is it would actually move the internet outside of the U.S. jurisdiction so that they wouldn't be beholden to that type of thing. It would be devastating. So I really, I do want to say Section 230 is not the answer. The answer is to deregulate business and the internet as much as possible so that smaller, more disruptive upstarts can get involved in the social media realm and the internet realm without having to rely on these big players that already have entrenched market share thanks to the regulatory structure that's in place. And also for us to put politicians in office who don't put regulators in place, who actively threaten people who allow for free speech on their platforms. A lot of this is happening this is a lot of tail wagging the dog, where you have government telling these platforms, like they did with Mark Zuckerberg in the wake of the Capitol Hill riots and through corporate media, you have to censor this, because it was after the threats that then Zuckerberg went from saying, we're not going to restrict any more than we already are, to saying, well, actually, you know what? I think there just needs to be less political opinion. And we've seen it in libertarian and conservative platforms. Even some of the far left-wing platforms have also been affected. We're seeing that unless you are in this sort of center to center left, Overton window of allowable thought, then you simply are not going to be heard. You're going to be increasingly deplatformed. That is an extension of what happens when you get government more involved. We need less of that than more of that. But we can talk about that endlessly. David, thank you so much for coming on. I actually want to give you a chance before I let you go. I want to give you a chance to say anything that you didn't get to say on the show or while we were talking. Anything you want to promote, any upcoming articles, any upcoming events, anything that you want to say. By the way, and I actually, after you give your final thoughts, I have something to promote that's in Alabama coming up this weekend. But before I do that, I want to give you the final thought as much as time as you want. David Preston, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Spike. Basically, what I want to say is that if you haven't searched out independent media sources that are run by individuals or a group of individuals, you really need to broaden your horizons and seek out those media sources, because you're going to learn stuff that you're not going to learn from the corporate world, corporate media, like Spike said. And even if you do hear it on the national news, you're not going to get the full stories. There's been several times that a story's happened here in Mobile that a day or two later it gets mentioned in a national news article, and they distort what actually happened, or they don't actually give you the full context of it. So search out those independent sources, because you're going to get that context that you're not going to get from corporate entities, because they just don't have the ability to do that. If you live in Alabama, or you have family members that live in Alabama, and you want to learn more about what's going on in Alabama, I encourage you to go to BamaNewsNow.com. That's all one word, Bama, like Sweet Home Alabama, newsnow.com. You can also find us on Facebook at BamaNewsNow. You can find us on Twitter at BamaNewsNow, Gab, Parler. The next few days, I'll be getting signed up with MeWe so we can start promoting on MeWe as well. We have a columnist by the name of Pete Ream that writes a column every Wednesday. He writes a column about a national topic that's from a very conservative point of view that I think a lot of your listeners would find interesting. I write about once a week, once every other week about something. I will certainly be writing this weekend about civil asset forfeiture and the bill that got passed out of committee about it, because it's certainly something that needs to end in Alabama and needs to end nationwide. And certainly, Spike, if you ever want me to come back on and just talk about anything related to Alabama, journalism, politics, heck, I can even we could even do an hour or two about aviation manufacturing, because Mobile's got Airbus here in Mobile where we build Airbus planes, and talk about government intervention in a private industry sector. Boeing with Boeing and the Defense Department and the aviation industry in general. That's something you and I could probably do 2 hours on and not cover the same topic twice. So
wow.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. Stick around. I'm going to talk with you during the outro. But folks, thanks again for tuning into this episode of My Fellow Americans. Speaking of Alabama, if you live anywhere near or around Huntsville, Alabama, and David, I think you were saying you were hoping to come out. I think you weren't sure yet if you were going to be able to, but in Huntsville, Alabama, I will be at the Libertarian Party of Alabama's 2021 convention, March 19th, 20th, and 21st. I will be there. I will be giving a couple speeches, and I will also be participating in an episode of the Seth and Willie Fred show on the 20th, live appearance. I've been on their show a couple times, and I would love to have you. And David, do you know yet if you'll be able to come, or?
I won't be able to come, mainly for two reasons. I'm still having car trouble with 2 out of my 3 vehicles, and I'll be getting my second dose of the Moderna vaccine on the 20th.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, we will miss you, but hopefully I'll get to see you the next time I'm in Alabama. Hopefully it'll be soon.
I'm down my way. Folks, we got beautiful beaches down here. I know you got Myrtle Beach.
I know. The what is it? The Golden Coast, right? Isn't that what they call it? The Gold Coast.
It's Emerald Coast in Florida, but I don't know.
Emerald Coast.
The sunny Dauphin Island is the sunset capital of Alabama.
Yeah, no, and that whole Gulf Coast there is absolutely beautiful. I will, hopefully we can get a libertarian event going down there as an excuse for me to go to as a vehicle for me to also be able to go to the beaches there. So, but yeah, so I will be in Alabama this weekend. So anyone who is in or near Huntsville, Alabama, come on out. Go to I believe it's lpalabama.org. Let me make sure of that. Bama. Is that what it is? Yeah, lpalabama.org to find out how you can register for the convention. I'd love to meet you in person, and join me next week on Tuesday, right back here, Tuesday at 8 p.m. for the Muddy Waters of Freedom, where Matt Wright and I parse through the week's events like the 2020 Wonder Boys that we are, and then right back here next Wednesday for another episode of My Fellow Americans, right here, same spike plate. Well, actually, same spike place, normal spike time. This was 1 hour off because I was on Kennedy. Next week, it'll be at 8 p.m. Eastern. My guest will be Scott Horton. We will be talking about all the foreign policy stuff. Scott Horton is definitely an expert when it comes to foreign policy and the wars and genocides overseas. So that'll be a fantastic topic. But folks, thanks again so much for tuning in. Thank you to David for coming on. And thank you for watching. I'm Spike Cohen, and you are the power. God bless, guys.
skin, my friend. In reality, you are my kin, though I view the world through another's iris. If you slide in my kicks, it might fit. We might just unite and come together, become hybrid, at the least slightly like-minded. Indeed, the life I've lived brings light to kindness. All you need is a sign. Put a cease to the crimes, put an ease to the minds like mine. Sometimes darkness is all I find. You know what they say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny I would cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside, but the holes in the body that was alive, now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine, caught up in them versus die. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child whom the tomb is flashing by? Now you have to say goodbye when you watch them on the news at 5. Don't tell me how, tell me why.